Hi, this is Andrew Connell with Critical Path Training, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the new managed metadata and metadata everywhere throughout SharePoint in the Enterprise Content Management module. So Microsoft has made, Microsoft's first foray into the Enterprise Content Management space really came in SharePoint 2007. In SharePoint 2010, they've taken a very, they've enhanced their enterprise content management offering by adding a lot of new features, but then they've also made it a much more flexible system to work with. And it's kind of, you can think of it as almost a ECM for the masses, where the focus is to get as many people involved in participating in ECM-based solutions and contributing to an ECM-based solution, and then also giving the records managers the power that they need and the control they need to be able to effectively manage these different things. So there's a couple different things that Microsoft did from a high level here. One thing, responding to customer feedback, was they've added in this capability of defining enterprise content types. And what this is we'll spend a little more time talking about it, but this is basically the ability for me to define one site collection as the hub, and then define a bunch of content types inside of that site collection that are then able to be published throughout a bunch of other site collections throughout the farm. And through any other farms that are leveraging my managed metadata service application. They've also had a significant investment in the area of metadata all throughout SharePoint. So you'll see that as we talk more about the metadata in this section here, there's a lot of emphasis on adding metadata to lists and to tagging things and all that kind of stuff, and then also how we can actually leverage that in search solutions and navigation and such. And then finally, there was a big focus on the featurization of a lot of the records management capabilities that we used to have in SharePoint 2007. So it was basically making it so that we did not have to be restricted to working with just one specific site template. Now we could use a lot of the records management stuff throughout multiple sites and stuff. And so we'll look at a little bit at that in another session. But first, talking about a little bit about the managed metadata service here. Now, what the managed metadata service application is going to do is basically two big things here. He's going to allow us to help define a taxonomy/folksonomy and manage those things centrally within my farm. And he's also going to give us the capability to do content type syndication. He does provide a managed metadata manager to be able to go through and to manage those taxonomies and such. And we'll look more at that in just a second. We can also go through and leverage a lot of these terms and also keywords, which is a keyword is, we'll talk more about it in a second, but a keyword is a little more like a free, not so much a structured taxonomy, or it's more like a folksonomy. We can also go through and take metadata from one from one managed metadata service application, and we can import it into the taxonomy store of our service application if we wanted. So that if someone had defined what like the healthcare taxonomy is, or a manufacturing taxonomy, I could take that and import it straight into mine, so that maybe if there's a certain industry standard, we can make sure that we're conforming to that standard. There's a lot of integration too with terms and keywords in what's called Backstage inside of Office 2010 clients. Backstage is that new thing that shows up when you click on the File menu, the colored tab inside the Office clients, where you do the new add, open, save, share, print, all that stuff. You can go through and and it exposes a lot of the tags and the keywords, and then you have the ability to go in and even customize that to add your own stuff. And then another thing that we have with the managed metadata is we have a new site column field type called managed metadata. And what this is going to allow us to do is to add a new column to our pages, or to anything really, a list item, a document library, or pages in a WCM site. And we can just tag the page up as much as we like. We can define that item. We can define that column to be associated with a specific term store and not just with the entire taxonomy here. So let's first talk a little bit about the external content. That was a bit of an overview. Let's talk about some of the external content types that we have, or the enterprise content types that we have inside of SharePoint 2010. In the previous version, content types were scoped at most at the site collection level. But now what we can do is we can scope these guys at across the entire farm. What happens is you're going to define these in one spot inside one site collection, and then you're going to go to the Managed Metadata Service application and look at its properties, and you're going to be able to say that this is the site collection that contains all of the content types that could potentially be published and shipped over to other site collections that are associated with this service application and that also want to use those guys. The way it works is that when you publish a content type to another SharePoint, another site collection, that content type that's then been defined, that's been defined in the source and now is being used in one of the consumers, it's marked as read-only and sealed inside of one of the consumers, where I can't make changes to it in one of the target site collections. But what I can do if I do want to make changes is I can go create another content type that inherits from that one and make my changes to my content type. All right. You need to think a little bit too when you implement this on the content types that you're sharing across the enterprise and maybe across enterprises or across farms. Because if you've defined a content type that has a custom policy with some custom code or a custom workflow associated with it or a custom forms or custom event receivers, you need to make sure that those things are deployed to those other farms and to all the servers in the farms that are going to be that could potentially use that content type. Otherwise, that stuff's not going to go along with it, and then the content type doesn't really represent what you were trying to make it represent. So it's just something you want to try and keep in mind there. Okay. Now, I've already mentioned that metadata is really everywhere inside of SharePoint 2010. What Microsoft has done is that there's lots of ways that they've leveraged this. So one of the things that we have is metadata-based navigation, to where if I take a document library and I've added content to that, I've added a lot of content to that document library, and there's lots of subfolders and lots of documents, and I've tagged up all those guys. One of the things I can do to that document library is I can go into his navigation settings and turn on the metadata-based navigation. What that's going to allow us to do is to now I can go in and I can say, I'll be able to browse all the content in the document library by just clicking on the different tags, and it's going to show me my taxonomy, which basically is going to essentially flatten my entire document library, no more folders, and it's just going to show me the content based on these different keywords I'm clicking on, or the different terms I'm clicking on, to make things a lot easier to go through and find stuff. It's also going to make things a little bit nicer too, where when people want to go through and find content and move it around or something using those tags, it's going to make things a lot easier that way. When I go through and run a search against content, there's a new capability in the SharePoint search called refinements over on the left-hand side. And what they're going to do, these different refinements, they're going to allow me to drill into the search results from my query. One of the refinements that's provided is the fact that when content is indexed, it's going to also pull out the tags. So one of the refinements that's made available to us are the tags. I can click on tags and say I'm only looking for content in this result set that matches this tag and this tag and this tag. So I can kind of filter my stuff down a little bit more to have a better idea for what's going on, all right, and what kind of content I have. Now, you've got this thing called, let's talk a little bit about how the metadata is actually structured. You have this thing called the term store, and that's where all of your terms are going to be defined. And then you're going to create some groups and then term sets inside those groups. So what I would do then is once I create a group, so I'm going to have my term store is the whole store of my service application, and then a group is just different groupings of different term sets. Now my term set, one of them could be like say locations or industries or products and manufacturing, and then under that I have a bunch of terms. Terms can have child terms as well, so I can have this nested nice and deep if I want. I'm going to be able to go in, and when I define my term store, one of the things that I can do is I can set up not only a hierarchical or a flat list, but I can also go in and I can make this guy change his submission policy so that I will either allow people to submit terms to the taxonomy, or I can make it closed where only they can't submit it, they can only pick terms that are already there. There's lots of things I can do with terms. I can go in and say things like I can disambiguate terms. I can join two terms together. So if somebody was using one term for something and somebody else is using a different term for something, I can merge the two together into one term, and all the content that was tagged with either one of them will then be updated to go through and to use this new term here. One question that usually comes up is, well, where are these terms stored? Well, it really kind of depends on how you're looking at it. The terms are going to be stored with the Managed Metadata Service application, so they're centrally stored, but then the data for the actual items themselves, there's a link to the term inside the list items. There's a link to the term inside the list item, referencing it inside the term store, but then the term itself is also stored inside the list item. Now, if I do go in and I update a term, I rename a term, or I do one of those disambiguations, or I join them, SharePoint will, at a certain interval, will come down and will update that content to use the new term. So it's not like things are going to get like orphaned. It just may not happen instantly. It may be a little bit more of a delayed thing that's a little bit of a scheduled job that's doing the cleanup and stuff. All right. Now, the metadata manager is going to be the main tool we're going to use to go through and to manage our term store. And we'll see this in just a few minutes. One of the other things that we can do with terms is that we can set up translations. And so we can say that there's a French translation of a word, or a Spanish translation, or a Japanese translation. We can set that up, as well as we can set up synonyms. So synonyms are helpful for, let's say I was going to go through and do like an airline booking system. And I had places like Seattle and Tampa and Jacksonville all listed on the, let's see, in Orlando. We'll pick one that's a little off there. So Seattle and Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando for the different cities. And those are, all three of those would be separate terms inside my term store. But I want to be able to also provide the airport codes. So for Seattle, it's SEA, Jacksonville is JAX. One that is kind of off a little bit is Orlando is MCO, and Tampa, I believe, TMP or TPA. What I can do in different places where those terms are being used, if I type in, like on the Managed Metadata Site column, if I type in SEA and or if I type in MCO, it will give me the option to think that, okay, I'm looking for something that matches MCO, or you want Orlando. So it'll see those kinds of things, a nice little IntelliSense. We'll see that in just a minute. The term store also has this thing called keywords. What the keywords are it's basically just this giant bucket of just words that people can go through and they can just tag up content without really, without any kind of like a structured feel to it. So it's more like a folksonomy there, where people are just kind of putting words associated with a piece of content. One of the nice things though is that from the Managed Metadata tool inside of the Managed Metadata Service app, I can take a keyword and I can promote him up into my folksonomy in the whole term store hierarchy, and it would automatically update all the content that use that keyword to use to be a new term now that would now be available to us. We also have tags. These tags here, what these are, there's two kinds of tags. One kind of tag is tags that are going to be like a shell tag, which is if I tagged up a document, and when I went to go download that document, the tags are going to be pushed into the document as some metadata on the document. And the social tags are something similar to that, but they're not really going to be stored. They're not going to be stored with the item themselves. They're going to be stored separately. So you may see, like in the UI, where you have a place in the upper right-hand corner where you can tag a page. That's not really so much using the Managed Metadata Store. That's more or less being stored with the people service. All right. So I've talked a good bit here about what the Managed Metadata Manager, what the Metadata Manager is actually going to do to go through and a lot of things I can go through and control here. Some of the other things that I can do it with is manage some custom properties. Now that's not done through the tool so much. That's only done through the API. That's going to allow me to have just additional like property bag on my terms themselves. And I've already talked a little bit here about the submission policy and how we can have them be multilingual. This is a picture of what the Managed Metadata looks like, but let's go through and instead of going through and seeing a picture, let's kind of see this guy in action. So we're now going to take a second and take a look at working with Managed Metadata, both from the administrative side and also on the consumption side. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we can leverage some of the metadata inside of SharePoint. So what I'm going to do here is let's first go into central administration and see where the administration story of this will be found. If I go into application management and then under the managed service applications, you'll see that I have this managed metadata service. So I'm going to pick this managed metadata service, and then I'm going to go through, I'll click on this guy, or I could click manage. And what you see here, I've already got a couple things already set up. Now, I've already gone through and set up who a term store administrator is. So this isn't available to everybody. I can actually set who's going to be allowed to do this, who's going to be allowed to manage these things. And then I have the term stores, the managed metadata service here. And then I have this group here called the Contoso group. So I can create new ones by just clicking on this bit and saying a new group, or I went through and created it that way. I can then go through and then create a new term set or import a term set. So let's say I want to go through and import a term set here. I could go pick from an existing term set that I've already pulled down here. Actually, I don't have one, so we're not going to do that. So I could go through and just pull it in. Now, what that is that's just a little CSV file that'll let us import stuff. You can see here that I have a way for us to go through and to say who's going to have the ability to also manage some stuff inside of this group. I have the same thing here to go through and do with the different term sets here. So I have I have one for industries. If I open up industries, you can see I have a bunch of different tags that have already been listed here, right? Now, I can also go in and like say, let's go through and let's create one here for, we'll just call it different like locations here. So we'll have a new term set called locations, and inside locations, we want to have a couple different cities. So we'll have like Seattle, Jacksonville, Orlando, and Tampa. Now notice too, see the IntelliSense that's popping up down here. It's looking at some of the other terms that are in the term store to see if I actually mean something else, which in this case I know I'm not the one typing in here. So I'm just going to keep typing in Tampa like this. Now I can come over here to Seattle and I can go through and set up like a synonym or abbreviations for this guy. So we'll go through and for Seattle, we'll say it's Seattle. So we just went through and saved Seattle as a synonym. Come over here to Jacksonville. I say Jax for Jacksonville. Save my changes there. We'll come over to Orlando. So we'll then pick Orlando and then add an MCO. And we'll save that term. Okay, so now we've got a couple terms that have already been defined here. Now let's go through and let's use these guys within a site. So I'm going to come over to my Contoso site here, which is already set up to use the managed metadata service. And I'm going to go into let's go into our projects list here, and let's add in let's go employees, and we'll just say where these employees are located. So I'm going to go into the settings for my list, and we're going to go in and add in a new column for this guy. So we're going to create a column, and inside the column we're going to call this hometown, and I'm going to pick manage metadata as the field type. So if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see here I now have a section where I can go through and define the term set that I want to use, which I can pick it from the list of terms that are available to me, such as locations, or I can go through and create a custom term set. This will be saved with the managed metadata service application, but you'll see that you can see that inside of site settings, I do have a place to go through and manage the terms just for this one site collection. So I don't have to have this centrally managed to where it's going to be a bottleneck for me to go through and to get anything added. So I'll save my changes here. And if I go back to my employees list and I go to Dan Jump and say, well, let's edit Dan Jump here. Now you see here in this hometown, what I can do here is I can start typing in, let's say his hometown is in Jacksonville. So I can type in JA and it will try and go through and find Jacksonville, or it finds a synonym. So if I type in Jax, it knows that I mean Jacksonville. Pick that, I can just say save, and now he's tagged up. Angela lives in Orlando. So I could type in Orlando, or I could type in MCO. There we go, and then hit save. And you notice the tag itself the term itself is being saved, not the synonym. But when I do searches, it'll find those as well. All right, so that's just one of the ways I can go through and use these different metadata settings here. Obviously, there's lots of options for how you can leverage metadata inside of SharePoint, being able in search solutions and such to be able to tag content up. I also talked a little bit about how you can go through and tag pages in SharePoint by going through and using like this tags and notes section over here, where if I click on this, I have the ability to go through and to tag a page up. So something I can just start typing in tags, but you'll see that's pulling from all sorts of things inside of my term store, or I can just go through and create a brand new one, and that would be seen as like a keyword. Okay. All right. So that's now you've seen how you can go through and administer metadata and also leverage metadata inside of SharePoint.